So how are you doing in all of this?
Oh, how am I doing in all of this? It's a good question. It's since since I since I saw this thing, and I haven't watched the full video because I just can't bring myself to watch that whole thing. But
Yeah, I decided I didn't want to.
yeah, I watched just enough to kind of get a sense of what it was that was going on. I didn't want to hear him saying I can't breathe.
Oh,
I certainly did not want to hear him calling for his deceased mother.
oh, Mama, I'm done.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
just, and for me, one of the things that occurred to me was, and I guess it was prompted in part by a comment that Al Sharpton made, saying, why one of these is he's calling for his mother who he knows is dead.
yeah.
And I thought that, and this is kind of esoteric, I guess, to some degree, but maybe his mother was standing right there with him when this was going on.
Wow. Yeah.
I can imagine. I've the stories about people who are in their last moment of life. Then they someone from the other side comes to accompany them. So they'll the doctors is, oh, he's having a hallucination. He's seeing his mother or his father. Well, maybe that's not a hallucination at all. Maybe what the Lord is doing is sending an angel, the one who's on his way out recognizes to give him some comfort that he's all right, even in the midst of this terrible thing. So, I mean, there's no evidence that I can proclaim for that other than just my own imagination. But
intuition as well.
It's a terrible thing. And, and now just to see how maybe, and not even so much how the president is reacting, because you don't expect anything from him. At least I don't expect anything from him. But it's becoming clear to me that there is a kind of nakedness to evil. And I know we talked a little bit about this, how evil just won't stop. It knows no limit. It keeps on going. That it's clear that there are forces afoot in this nation, and not just this nation, but around the world. I was reading your some of your posts about the anti-blackness that sometimes shows up in Arab.
Sometimes it's
this
very frequent, and it's systemic.
Yeah, right. That's what it tends to be.
Ways that it occurred to me, by no means, I'm not trying to compare. Comparisons are dangerous on a very real level. So I hesitate in making a statement. But it occurred to me that Black people in a lot of these Arab countries, Black people in the US can still, it's disgusting and awful, but they can still do something with their lives. There is that possibility. It's right. Black people in a lot of these Arab countries can't do it. Like, they are stuck in many ways. And it's such, but anyway, I didn't mean to say it.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I'm, it's just, it's the way that things tend to operate as if this is an expectation, one of the eerie senses, and I preached about this on Sunday, it was a part of my sermon because I was just in the middle of it. I started working on it Saturday night, and I got up at like about 6 o'clock on Sunday morning, hammered it out before my Zoom service at 11. But that police officer was staring straight into the camera of that young lady who was 17. It was a 17-year-old girl that was taking this video.
Yeah.
And he he was staring straight into the lens.
Wow.
While he had his knee on this man's neck,
Mm.
on George Floyd's neck.
Wow.
And I had an eerie recognition. It reminded me of, you know, how when these great white hunters go out into Africa, or, you know, and they're standing over there or kneeling over their slain prey while they hoist their rifles.
Mm.
And that is exactly what that looked like. He said, this man is posing.
Wow.
This is a pose that this man is taking as he kneels on what by then probably the dead body of another human being, staring at this young girl and staring and saying, yeah, I'm doing this. And not only, oh, what are you going to do, but what is anybody going to do?
Yeah, the look of defiance. I mean, I've only
the look of defiance.
Very brief seconds of the video, which and I choose not to watch because
right.
Decision. But I've seen some of the images, some of the photographs, and just the look of defiance in his eyes.
Because again, the police are not the problem.
No.
They are a symptom of the problem.
Yeah. It runs.
What they are the tip of the spear of a system that is designed to suppress the righteous indignation of a people who are being treated in an inhuman way, in a barbaric way. You know, the school systems, the hospital systems, banking systems, insurance. You can't get decent food in these communities. You can't get decent health care. When people try to stand up for themselves, they're knocked down at every moment. I mean, like, we're I guess is it 100 years ago since Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where successful Black businessmen and women were set upon by white mobs, that for the first time that bombs were dropped from airplanes in this country. They were dropped on Tulsa, the Black community in Tulsa. Destroyed the economy that these people had built. They weren't saying integrate. They weren't trying to, go downtown and make sure that they spent their money and wipe it. They said, well, okay, we'll build our own stores. And they were able to successfully build their own stores. And they were able to successfully work together to lift themselves up, and the rage and the anger. I'm reminded of a line from a film called Silverado, one of the Kasdan brothers, and it was I can't think of the fellow's name, but he played the father of Danny Glover. And there was a line in there when he says they make it so you can't do. Yeah. So that even when you want to do and you try to do, they thwart your efforts. Yeah. They're leaning on this man's neck. And this is symptomatic of that statement. They're leaning on his neck. And one of the other cops saying, why don't you get up and get in the car?
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
So the cop is leaning on him, knee on his neck, while another cop says, why don't you get up and get in the car?
Oh, my God.
So it's that kind of mendacity, that kind of, and you see, that for me, for me, and I think I may have said this the last time we talked, but COVID-19 is not the pandemic. Yeah. White supremacy is the pandemic. It's one of many pandemics, but it clearly is a pandemic as it pertains to the Black and brown community. White supremacy is that pandemic.
A deep structural systemic hatred of the other.
Kind of mindless hatred. Because to what is it that, what is it that Black people have done?
No, this is the thing
that justifies that kind of behavior. One of the things that you start to, I mean, it's a natural kind of thing. If nobody will ask you to participate, at some point or another, you start to think that maybe there is something wrong with me. Yeah. And so one of the questions that has plagued the Black community for so long is this notion that maybe, maybe what have we done? And but it's clear that we've done nothing to behave, to justify that kind of behavior. That it's a kind of mindless rage at something that it does not come from any knowledge of who it is that we are, but you have created, like James Baldwin says in one of his articles, "I'm not your nigger," right? He said, you all have created this image that you call the nigger. You have created it whole cloth out of your own imagination. This is not who you've known us to be. This is what you have created in your own imagination so that you can justify the behavior that you then visit upon us. So what Baldwin was saying is that I'm not the nigger. If it comes out of your imagination, you are the nigger, in fact, So it is, there's some deep sicknesses.
I was just going to use that word,
it's a deep sickness. It's a deep sickness.
And I honestly can't wrap my head around it sometimes, because from a metaphysical, spiritual point of view, it's simple. It's a sickness of the heart that people clearly haven't dealt with. But then sometimes that simple metaphysical, spiritual prognosis or diagnosis isn't enough, because it's so strange.
Right.
To put it mildly, it really is deeply confounding.
Right. And the fact that it's not just what some individual or group of individuals think. It has morphed into a kind of system.
Yeah.
It's, so when we talk about systemic racism, and then it operates across the board.
Yeah.
In every endeavor, in every phase. So you see it in the criminal justice system, you see it in the educational system, you see it in there's a book called Medical Apartheid that talks about the ways in which Black people were used as guinea pigs that would make your hair stand on end. I mean, never mind.
I'm sure they're still being used, but
it's still being used, absolutely, up to this very day. That
the reports come out decades later as though this is what used to happen.
Right.
Dude, you're doing worse things now, I'm sure.
No, that's exactly right.
It'll come out 20 years down the line.
Right. And so to create these kinds of systems, if that is not the devil, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, no, this is.
It is pure evil.
It's evil beyond any human comprehension. There's no, and we've spoken in the past about the question, the problem of, the problem of sometimes, not the problem, the barriers that people face on occasion, very often actually, not just on occasion, with calling evil, right? That people say, well, whatever arguments put forward, but evil has to be called out for being evil. I don't care, really. I'm getting to a point now in life where I increasingly don't care to be quote unquote politically correct. Right. If being politically correct means not really calling evil out as being evil, then that type of correctness is totally incorrect. It's part of the problem.
Right.
And it is demonic. Right. So
That's demonic. That's the word.
Right. What's happening in society? What's happening through history? And not just, these aren't isolated incidents. These things happen all the time. Slavery. This country, the US, was founded on slavery. Right. And what is happening, right? What kind of narratives are people creating within themselves to justify the absolute barbarity of their behavior towards other human beings? And as human beings, this is the problem. It's a very human problem. We do it all the time in various different guises, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the reason that it's now, demons are skillful. They're not stupid, right? But there is it reminds me a little bit of when Jesus was on the cross, his first statement, alleged first statement, was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now, it was clear that at one level, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, right.
But there was a profound ignorance, a profound spiritual ignorance that was operating at another level. So while these systems of oppression are very specific and very strategic and founded in a way that make absolute sense, twisted sense of sense, right? There is a level of ignorance, a level of profound ignorance that operates at another level that they don't understand. And so, what sounds like kind of a naive prayer for the forgiveness of a people who are treating you badly is, if you look at it more deeply, is a much more profound recognition and the ability to ask that these people appeal to a power that had the capacity to forgive. This first statement was addressed to the father of the man who was on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I continue to think of, and this is one of what I believe to be, it is just so spectacular, so marvelous, so wonderful, that Black people still can't remain loving and powerful, can find ways to laugh in the midst of all of this. I mean, if there is something about what we are able to do in the face of evil, in the face of this kind of mindless evil, that is, I don't quite know what to do with it, but it just fills my heart with a kind of joy. And I'm sure that it must fill the devil, if you will, or these demonic forces with a kind of rage. How in God's name, how in the name of anything can these folks continue to remain as they remain in the face of the treatment that we, from time to time, and I'm saying the larger we, the dominant societies, we know to be horrible treatment. And I think that it is in part, Hassan, I think that that's a part of the reason why they fear us so. They don't fear us because of anything that they can point to say that we've done to them. But I think they know. They know that what their treatment is barbaric. And they know what they would do if the shoe were on the other foot. They know what they would be doing if we were doing to them what they do to us. And that is the source of their fear, I think. That's just my thought about that. How else can you, what is it that you need to do about that? How can you, and this is also the case, that when you kill me, you kill yourself. That police officer is a dead man. And by dead, I mean, he still has the function. I'm saying he was arrested, but I mean, they cut him loose. He's not still in jail. Nobody said anything about that, but he's not in jail. I'm sure they arrested him, they charged him, and they released him on his own recognizance, or because there was no hearing yet. He's probably not been posted bail, none of that stuff. But he's not locked up in jail.
I heard he was put in a maximum security.
Well, I hope that's the case. I hope, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they arraigned him and then let him go. That he's been charged. You can be charged and not be held in prison, or not be held in jail. So maybe he is. I hope that he is. But that's a question that has not been asked that I've heard on the air. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he were not out walking around. Because even as because the issue of allowing somebody to be released, I don't know. Maybe he is still in jail. I hope that he is, but I wouldn't be surprised if he weren't. But the larger point as to whether or not he's in jail or not he's already dead.
He's spiritually dead.
He's spiritually dead. He's a dead man. And you see, he's kind of like a zombie. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing. That's what we see with Donald Trump yesterday when he decides for a photo op. He's going to clear out a group of peaceful protesters so that he can take a walk to a church that he ain't never been in and never came in there to pray. Didn't even mention what it was that had happened to the man. Didn't, you know, he gets his people and he holds up a Bible that he's probably never even read. He probably didn't know which end to hold up.
Wow.
But again, Donald Trump is not the problem. Donald Trump is a system. Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere, came out of somewhere. And until America is prepared to deal with that, and I haven't seen anything. And maybe this could be something that, but I hold out hope. Like, for instance, I held out that maybe after they shot up all those little white children up there in Newtown, Connecticut, that they would do something about gun violence. Well, it lasted for a minute. And then what got more play was this guy running around saying that the Newtown massacre was a hoax. But these are difficult, very difficult times, and also very marvelous, wonderful times. Both of those things exist at the same time. It's a great stripping away of the scales from our eyes, that we are being exposed in a way that we hadn't been exposed before. It's like COVID puts a bright spotlight on all the inequities that exist in society, and how people are dying in disproportionate numbers to their numbers in the general population. That's COVID is showing us this. That's what it is. It's a window into America's and the world, for that matter. Never will forget what happened with Bhopal. And those, the vast majority of poor folks died because of what happened in Bhopal. We see it all over the globe. We see it all over the globe.
Can the United States recover from this, do you think? Well, where are things heading right now? I mean, it's still
we're now these so-called and they're talking about white supremacist organizations and KKK and other organizations that talk about Antifa trying to kind of come in, left-wing organizations and right-wing organizations that are trying to hijack our pain and our misery to some other ends. I don't know. I mean, the hope is, because I'm still here, the hope is that America is at this dark moment, but there is the possibility that joy may come in the morning, that the sun might rise on a, but it's not going to just happen.
No, right.
Martin said, justice does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It requires the activity of thoughtful people. I was really pleased to hear the Episcopal bishop from the area take Donald Trump to task for what it was that he had done. I said every religious leader in America and on the planet ought to be doing the same thing she's doing. But, we hear, it's amazing, the silence, even among my own. We're not, there are people that are saying things here and there, and I don't know if that's because out of fear. I don't know. There's some people saying some things, but there is a deadening silence. There is a deafening silence.
So I posted something a few days ago. It was a quote from Martin Luther King, and I'm going to do a bad job paraphrasing, but essentially about the silence of
our friends,
right, being more deadly and dangerous than the enemy's actions, as it were. And I sort of, by way of commentary, or whatever, just added some of my own words. So in my mind, I'm sort of still quite aware of what happens in the Muslim communities, And I know of some very big name Muslim leaders who are kind of worshipped, blindly by their followers, and they're totally silent. And my thing was, these people, without mentioning any names, you know who they are, they're not our friends. Because if they're not speaking out in times of extreme anguish and pain and suffering, then they have chosen themselves as their friends. This is my take, and I can understand these things are complicated, but in certain instances, examples that I specifically can think of in writing this, certain names that came to mind, I was actually thinking specifically of certain white Muslim converts who are leaders, who are very big names. So you're white, you're male. You have a lot more that you are able to say without getting into trouble.
That's right.
At what point in this journey did you sell your soul to the devil? This I know happens all the time. I know, I mean, I don't know that they literally sold their souls to the devil, but actions speak louder than words. Many of these people have done so many things over the years which are highly questionable, and the community continues to support them blindly. And this is a huge problem in the Muslim community, where, speaking of racism, there's this weird things that, I mean, it's not so weird when we think about it. It's obvious that this happens, but it's so tragic that non-white Muslims, let's say brown Muslims and Arab Muslims, they're of course Black Muslims, but I think their experience is slightly different, and it's somehow more intelligent. So seriously, that's been my experience from what I've seen. But these sort of brown, shall we say, South Asian Muslims, these Arab Muslims, and these color divides are problematic anyway, because you're brown, right? If you want to use that, then you get categorized. But and these categories we didn't even invent, right?
Right.
They were bullshit to deal with as well. But but you see what I'm saying? South Asian and Arab Muslims who feel that their sense of self-worth is their sense of Muslimness is somehow raised up if a white man or woman becomes Muslim. And then very quickly these white men and women get pushed to the front of and very often they're talented people. I don't want to say that people without talent, but are you telling me in the entire community of brown and people of color, Muslims who are of color, that there aren't people of color just as qualified, if not more qualified? Why are these white people being pushed to the front of the queue when it comes to
well, this thing. It's a worldwide. It's worldwide, so it's all over the world. So that's the kind of trick bag that colorisms have played. I mean, it's a stratification exists in the Black community. I went to a school in Virginia, a historically Black college in Virginia, and they were having what they call brown bag parties. Then what a brown bag party was, that you had to find a brown bag that was, I guess you had to be lighter than a brown bag, whatever brown bag, in order for you to be able to get into that was your ticket to get to the party. You had to find a brown bag that was darker than you, so that would gain your access to the party. I mean, there's colorism. We still struggle with that. The issue about, you're light or you're brown or you're too, like the old saying is, if you're black, no, what is it? If you're white, you're all right. Oh, wow. If you yellow, you mellow. If you brown, you can stick around. But if you black, you got to get back.
Oh, so sad.
And that was just one of the things. That was like a saying that we grew up with.
I wonder where these sayings came from, right? It's very
well. I mean, it
because of the internalized racism.
And that's a reaction to the internalized, and we react to it. Then we internalize it, and then we practice it among one another.
But of course, if you're white, you're not all right necessarily.
No, of course not.
Not necessarily bad either.
Right, exactly.
You're
Right.
not. I mean,
right.
if history tells us anything, I'm sorry to break it to people.
Yeah,
If
right.
you're white, numbers are problematic, but there's a whole
there's a
significant amount of history that is saying that you're not so right.
No, exactly. I mean, to predicate your value in society based upon that color is a predicate for your worth or your value is in itself a kind of mindlessness. It's insane.
It's very
to think that because you are white that there is some intrinsic value in who it is that you are.
Or if you're light. So coming from a South Asian context, I was just sort of, I'm sure I'd thought of this before, kind of meditated briefly on this before, but it occurred to me again this morning, in the bathroom of all places. But you know how
do some of my best thinking in the bathroom. However, that's
interesting. Right? Whether in the bath
or in the loo or the toilet, as the case may be.
Which is interesting. Somehow But the history of what wouldn't be called racism to use, because that it's can't think of the correct word now, but time-wise it's not the right term, right? But the prejudice shown in India, right? I mean, what that pre-partition India, historically, the Aryans versus the Dravidians, right? We read this history that the Aryans, right, they came and conquered,
right?
And, you know, the Dravidians were the sort of natives, they were the darker people. And the Aryans, historically, they established themselves as the rulers, right? And then they became, you know, part of the ruling class and the Brahmins, and you had the Shudras, the untouchables, being like the darkest people in society, right? And this is old, right?
Old stuff,
like ancient India. And till this day, this type of colorism occurs, is rampant in South Asia. I mean, being South Asian myself, coming from a historically very dark country, Bangladesh, but the number of times people, you know, I don't look typically Bangladeshi, like Bangladeshis, but, you know, I get treated differently. Like, I know this for a fact, you know, and it's so this stuff is weird, and I don't know what to do with it. And, you know, people of certain sector of Bangladeshi community, like if you're sort of richer and of a certain class, very often you're lighter, actually, which is very interesting, right? And how this stuff plays out. And the people you have as servants, right, who are kind of, they're not slaves, but they're not a tremendous amount better. They're not quite as bad, so, but, you know, they're third, fourth class citizens, right?
Right.
They're very dark, and this stuff, and they get treated subhuman. Right?
Yeah.
This is a deep problem. It's a global problem, and I don't know what to do with it. I mean, who am I to decide these things? But as a thinking human being, as a believer, I honestly, I don't know what to do with this.
Well, I think that thinking human beings and believers, this is something that we got to grapple with. We got to grapple with it in the dominant society as it manifests itself in the multitudinous ways in which it does. I mean, there's so many ways in which this thing just manifests itself. It's metastasizes. It's like it goes out in so different directions and undermines the entire system, the entire bodily system, the entire social system. It is so false to make these kinds of assumptions about people. What is it that we've lost by categorizing people in certain ways? Who knows? Some black child might have created the cure for cancer.
Of course.
Or it is obscene that we've wasted so much human capital on something as simple as that. There was a segment of I don't know if it was Star Trek, might have been Star Trek. Frank Gorshin. It was the segment of Star Trek when Frank Gorshin I think it was Frank Ocean. Anyway, people were on this planet that Spock and and the rest of the guys came to, and they found that people were fighting each other, and then they couldn't quite figure out why. And so it turns out that these people had one side of their face was dark and the other side was light. And they were fighting over which side. The controversy was not over the fact that they had but which side was, so the people who were dark on the right side had banded together, and they were fighting the people who were dark on the left side.
That's
right? So that's an interesting kind of, it's like, you say, well, how stupid is that? Okay. Yeah. How about that? That's an interesting kind of insight into the stupidity of the human species and how we can devolve into this. But it's, again, I think that the sickness is at the soul level, because if they didn't have that to fight, they'd find something else. So it's we'll figure it out. But the Rwandan massacre, in part, were people killing each other because the people who had been in charge at one point, the whites who had then moved out, put the people who had thin lips and thin noses in charge.
Oh God.
And the ones who were, I don't know if it's the Hutus or Tutsis, I'm really quite sure which, but they had broader lips and thicker, thicker. So, and there might have been some color differentiation, but that was not really, so that was not the whole reason, but that was a part of what was woven into the controversy that put them in a position where they were just killing each other, hacking one another to get to that. I don't know how long the thing lasted, but they managed to kill a couple of, or maybe 100,000 people with machetes in 90 days. So it's worldwide. I remember having a brief conversation with Dorian, Gary Dorian, and someone in the class asked, well, how come we don't hear more about what happened to the indigenous people?
Just in a couple of sentences about Professor Gary Dorian, because he's a powerhouse.
Yes, please.
Listen, no, if you could please.
He's just written. I mean, he's in the middle of about 4 or 5 different books at a time. Every time you turn around, he's written yet another book. But he's a professor at Union Theological Seminary. Has written a number of books, one of which is Smashing White Racism, or White Supremacy, I think it is, where he talks a lot about social justice ministries and Martin Luther King and others like that. So he's just written volume after volume of some really marvelous works. So we were in a class with him one day. Was that a sufficient enough? I know you probably have more.
That's beautiful. Yes.
Okay, that someone asked him why we didn't hear more about what had happened to the indigenous people, and having indigenous blood in his body himself.
Right. Yeah.
His response was, "There is no language. There's no language to describe what they did to the indigenous people in this country." And my pushback was, I said, maybe we need to listen better. Maybe there is language that we're just not listening. But I understood what he was saying. So we don't really hear much about that.
No.
And that it continues to this day. That what happened to the indigenous people in this is it's unthinkable.
Millions and millions.
Millions.
Yeah.
And the legacy of that is what we're seeing in Minnesota, what we're seeing in places all across the country. That's what we're seeing.
Sacred lands, right?
Yeah.
Where people's blood was shed. And I wanted to ask you also, and this isn't none of this is an easy discussion to be had, but someone posted in one of these groups, kind of runs, just it's called Islam Through. I'll add you to it, and I just kind of share a lot of stuff there, and people share. But someone shared this video from a British Nation of Islam member. I don't know his name, but he was speaking quite profoundly on certain issues, and I only managed to get a little less than half of the way through 20-something minute long video. And some of the stuff he was saying was about the evils of the white man, the historic evils of the white man, and the trope that, and he was addressing a primarily like brown Muslim audience, not only, but and sort of taking them to task and saying, well, you Pakistani and Arab Muslims, you don't realize that a lot of the time that your mosques are infiltrated by people, and isn't it interesting, he was saying, that these so-called terrorists, it turns out, more often than not, I think he said in all times, I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly, if indeed that's true, but in many a time, these people, it turns out later on that they were connected to these sort of security services in certain ways, that they were recruited. Yeah. So he was sort of going on, and I, again, wasn't able to listen to all of it, I had to do a couple of other things, but he was getting onto the language that the Nation of Islam is known for, as saying, as identifying the white man as the devil, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Right.
So, and this is, I know Malcolm X, of course, one of the great members of the Nation of Islam, played a major role in bringing Nation of Islam to worldwide prominence, who later turned his back on that narrative. I wanted to get some of your thoughts. It's not an easy discussion to have, because
right.
history, and of course I'm not saying that white men are and women are necessarily evil. At the same time, there's this force of history, and what do we do with this history?
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is, I remember there was I cannot think of her full name. Joy was her first name. I cannot remember her last name, but she was doing a symposium at Union, and there were a number of people. She was one of the panelists, and so she said, "I'm not going to talk about white people." She says, "What I'm going to talk about is white supremacy."
Okay, beautiful.
Because clearly, white supremacy is demonic. There's no question in my mind that white supremacy is demonic. Does that mean that every single, I used to feel, and I don't know if I said this before, but I used to feel this almost kind of obligation that when I was getting ready to talk about white people, I would say, we're not all white people. You make this kind of discourse, because it's just not true about all white people. That's just the case. I'm coming to the place where, while I'm still clear that it's not all white people, I'm also aware that it's not enough white people that aren't that way to make the systems that I'm decrying different from the way those systems actually are.
Yes.
So while I would not say that all white people are the devil, because that's just you can, the minute you do that, the minute you start calling people racist, white people racist, and you're in the conversation with somebody, you call them a racist, that's a game changer. That's a conversation ender. You can't go any further because then you get trapped in, yes, I am, no, you're not, or yes, you are, no, I'm not. And then you go back and forth. Well, you're not going to get anywhere in that kind of conversation. Where you are going to get, I think, that if you start talking about the existence of systems and how those systems operate as it pertains to people, to Black and brown people, then there's less wiggle room for you to argue that that system does not exist. That system does exist.
I think this
and
is
I mean, and that way, then we can get to the place where we start to say that if you know that system exists and you recognize it as a system that's evil, and how do you know it? I mean, I love the golden rule. The golden rule makes it do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, on the one hand, that seems overly simplistic, but it is profoundly and deeply true. Because if you know that a system that somebody else is being affected by is not a system that you would want to be affected by, if they are in the crosshairs of a system that you would not want to be in the crosshairs of, then you would know what it is that they're going through is not just because you would not want to be treated in the same way. And so that puts a moral responsibility on the people who know that these systems should not exist the way they do, to not just speak against them, but to take an active role in trying to demolish them or deconstruct them. Because believe me, Black people are the canary in the coal mine.
This is such an important point. Yes, this is.
When it happens to us, believe me, baby, believe me, it's going to happen to you.
Sooner or later.
Sooner or later. That's the way it works.
And probably sooner than most of us realize.
Sooner than later.
Yeah, right.
Sooner than later. I mean, to those boys that were carrying those guns out there to the Michigan State, Michigan, the State House in Michigan a few weeks ago, in Lansing, Michigan a few weeks ago, do they think that the 1% is going to ever invite them to the table?
This is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing.
You think that once you do their dirty work,
exactly,
and you have eliminated all of the people, first of all, you ain't gonna do that because you ain't as bad as you think you are. Because if you were that bad, you wouldn't be running around carrying on like that. The minute somebody shoots back at you, I'm thinking you may end up doing more running than shooting, But that notwithstanding, if you are able to eliminate all of the people that they claim to be enemies of whatever it is that they got you out there fighting for, do you think that they then are going to invite you to the table?
Oh, no. They're going to be,
No, they're not going to invite you to the table. They're not going to invite you. You're not going to get any better. In fact, those boys, they don't know it. They have more in common with Black people than they have with rich white people.
This is so important to remember. Yeah.
I love that. There was a wonderful line out of the film Bulworth. What's the boy's name? I can't call his name. I'm looking at his face now. He was in Bonnie and Clyde, whatever his name is. I can't think of his name. But there was a moment in the film where he is having this interview with somebody. And he says, poor white people have more in common with Black people than they have with rich white people. And in fact, poor white people are being treated just like niggers.
Oh, yeah. It's so sad that they're being.
I mean, you think that the fact that your skin color gives you certain privileges, look at how you're being educated or miseducated. Look at death rates among your children. Look at lack of proper health care in your communities. Why is it that your children are going to bed hungry every night? Black people are not the reason that that's happening to you. That's not what's happening. So, but you see, and the Bacon Rebellion, which I think everybody ought to study that Bacon Rebellion because it is such a powerful indicator. It was the last time they made up their minds that then race became woven into the fabric of America as a result of as a reaction to the Bacon Rebellion, because poor white folks and Black folks got together to fight the powers that be.
When was this?
Oh, I want to say back in the 1800s or into the late 1700s, into the early, something like that. But just look up the Bacon Rebellion. And there were a number of things that were going on, but there were people who got together across racial lines and worked together because they recognized the commonality of both of their conditions. And they realized who the enemy was. And then they said, oh no, we're going to figure out a way that we're not going to ever happen this again. Then they started applying the color, they started calling it white indentured service. White and Black became a part of the actual.
Well, this is a very old game, like dividing.
Oh, it's a very old game. It's a very old game. And the reason that they continue to use it is because it continues to work.
Yeah, all the time.
You're not gonna, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's working as a tool to divide people, Martin, it's no accident that when Martin when Martin got to the place where he started talking about a poor people's march, and started talking about getting poor blacks and poor Hispanics and poor Indians and poor whites to get together to redress the inequitous treatment, the inequities in the system. They said, oh no, we got to get rid of him. He got to go. You know, so they don't want people coming together across these. They don't want that.
How about right now? I mean, so we have language for this now, right? For the longest time, you know, you have these people who get categorized. Not mentioning any names, but you know, there's a general category that's used as conspiracy theorist, right?
Right.
These conspiracy theorists type of people saying, you know, there's this sort of hidden, shadowy group of people pulling the strings, and now we have a type of language for this, the 1%, and
right.
the two necessarily exactly map onto each other, both, but you know, there's something to be said, right? That at every sort of historic, or throughout human history, put it this way, there is a small group of people who, in terms of diagrams, if we were to represent it in terms of a pyramid, they sort of occupy the highest portion of that pyramid, and sort of things, as you progress down the pyramid, you have people working under them at various sort of in various functions to control the masses, right? Now, some might say, well, this is conspiracy theory. Well, history tends to bear this out, and it's interesting that you have someone as profound a thinker historically in the 20th century, largely forgotten now, unfortunately, but in his own lifetime was very influential. Lewis Mumford, who wrote The Pentagon of Power, for instance, and he sort of argues, using the symbolism of the pyramid, and also using the example, interestingly enough, of Pharaoh versus Moses. He says that this is the archetype of human struggle through history. And of course, Pharaoh is archetypally the builder of the pyramid. So you have there wasn't just one Pharaoh, but in this archetypal story, which of course, interestingly enough, is present in both the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish, Christian, and the Islamic traditions, interestingly enough. There's this singular authority figure who gets the masses, these sort of poor folk, the Jews in this context, with wholly other, to do his work, and they're slaves and they're enslaved, and then from amongst them arises this figure of Moses, who, unknown to, I mean, you know the story, but to refresh my memory, I just find it a fascinating story. Right. That Moses, who actually infiltrates Pharaoh's house.
Yeah,
right? And this is
Moses was a prince of Egypt.
Right, and this is divinely sound.
Absolutely,
and he manages to bring down that society from within. So I just find the symbolism of that story, and I mean, of this archetypal story, it's still relevant for us today.
I think so.
Sort of the contexts have changed. The American context isn't that of ancient Egypt, of course. The details have changed, but in broad-based principles, the principles are still the same. There's still the oppressed majority is fighting for its rights vis-a-vis the small minority that controls everything. Right. So I guess my question to you is, who are these Moses figures that we can turn to, and how do we unite, right? Because instead of saying, unfortunately, as it's being presented as in still very divisive terms, right? And in these very complex, painful, difficult times, but how can we unite on the whole, right, against this extremely oppressive, and beyond the left versus right divide as well, right? It has to get beyond these divisions, which again are designed to divide us.
Right. You know, you know, for instance, that this notion about the 1%. I've been watching this program called Billions on Showtime, right? And the 1% don't even like each other.
Right? How can they? Yeah.
I can't. You know, they're looking to figure out a way they can slit one another's throat at the drop of a hat. So.
Because these people are fundamentally ego-driven.
Ego-driven, fundamentally ego-driven, like id at the ego, like at the id level. You know what I mean? They're just, it's kind of like.
And the ego necessarily cannot accept the other. It may, for the sake of its own current, you know, contemporary benefit, say, okay, I'll put up with you for now. But again,
right. But only until, right, it's only for a minute, only until that allegiance that we have get, you know, so there are all these allegiances are always being redefined based upon, so we don't have any permanent, we don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies, we have permanent interests. And those interests are always the thing that's going to drive how it is that I operate in the world. And I don't care what anybody else says, me and mine, I got mine, you get yours. You can't have who you are. You, as an ego, you cannot be who you are in isolation of everybody else. How do you get the language that you speak, the language that you use to theorize and develop your thoughts and to develop your actions? You don't get that in some sort of a vacuum. We're social beings. At every level, we are required to interact with one another. To even understand who it is that you are, you've got to interact with somebody other than just yourself. So it's profoundly ignorant and it's profoundly self-serving. Excuse me, it does not serve the self.
It doesn't, no.
It undermines the self.
Self-destructive.
It cripples the self.
Yeah.
So that, you know, I think I'm not quite sure how we get out of this thing. One of the things is to like someone says you have to name these powers as they exist, and call them out. Once you call them out, they can't hide. One of the things about racism, one of the things about white supremacy that makes it so successful is its ability to hide behind the very people that it is marginalizing. It hides so that somehow or another, the reason that these people are being treated the way they're being treated is because there's something wrong with them.
Right.
You know, that's the reason why you see so many Black people in jail, because they're greater criminals than anybody else. Well, you know, what do you do with the fact that all these people smoking marijuana in jail because they smoke so much marijuana? Well, what do you do with the statistics that tells you that white people smoke as much marijuana as Black people? So, I mean, what is that? So, and you just see this over and over again. So every time they construct another lie, you put the truth to the lie, and rather than admit that, okay, you know, you caught me, and so stop lying, I'll try to figure out another lie. This is Toni Morrison talks about the fact that for such a long time, Black people have tried to chase the lies of white people. Oh, they said the reason that you're not as intelligent is because your brain is smaller, your head. So then we prove that to be wrong. And then just as soon as we prove that, then they create another lie. And as soon as you chase that lie down, then they've created another lie. Then you chase that lie down, and then they create another lie. And so what she says is there will always be another lie. So if you know that you're dealing with a liar, this is one of the things that for me that's so successful about that I think that in this way Donald Trump has blessed us. He is such a liar that you are no longer responsible for paying any attention to anything he says.
That's brilliant.
He's given me a pass on ignoring his ass.
Yeah.
You know, now there's somebody got to watch. Let the media watch it. Well, they helped create him, so that's your karma. You got to run around behind every time he calls a press conference when he's getting ready to say half of what he says, 3/4 of what he says is an outright lie, and you will spend your time identifying the fact that he's told all those lies. Well, okay, but you helped create him. You follow him. I'm not running behind him anymore. I'm not, oh, did you hear what he said? Well, you know, you need to save that breaking news story, that little thing, that little crawl across the bottom of the screen when you catch him telling the truth. So in that regard, if you know that the person is lying, then you're no longer responsible for paying attention to the lies that they tell.
Well, one of the names of the devil, the deceiver, the devil, right?
Is the
That's a
yes.
major tool. And am I remembering correctly that the Native Americans, I don't know, I can't remember which tribe specifically, but I remember hearing that they said about the white man that he speaks with forked tongue.
Forked tongue, absolutely. That is a perfect analogy.
And the forked tongue belongs to the snake.
There you go.
Right. So I don't know. It's okay if we. And this is a reminder to myself first and foremost that, you know, if we speak in archetypal terms, right? And you mentioned very importantly and very powerfully about identifying the system. So it's not a racial problem, but it's an archetypal problem that it doesn't matter. One can be brown or black or white or pink, purple, doesn't matter. We can have these tendencies. We have, this is as a possibility that this resides in my heart just as much as anyone else. And I can become deceitful. I can become demonic.
Right.
And I can take on the characteristics of this snake-like quality, which is, speaking of the ego mode of being, right? It's coming from the lizard brain. Like, it's very interesting
that's
how
the reptilian brain. Yes.
The reptilian brain, right? It's very interesting how a lot of this stuff starts to make sense on some level.
When you start to pull these things, see, this is the thing.
Yeah.
When you pull the string on this, it starts to unravel.
Yeah.
Because it is a part of the giant lie. Yeah. The big lie that in Hitler's time, he said, the thing to do with the big lie is to keep telling it. Keep telling it over and over and over again.
This is
after a while,
works. They know it's repetition is one of the ways.
Repetition
is how they train us to believe anything. We can convince literally of
about
anything if we're exposed to enough times.
If we hear it enough. We hear it enough. And the work for those thinking individuals is to avoid, the herd mentality.
Yes.
Always be in a position where you're questioning yourself, questioning your allies.
And any herd mentality, right?
Any herd mentality, right. Any herd, it could be within the group, without the group, it needs to always be questioned.
We like to feel comfortable, right? As human beings, we're social creatures.
Right.
And we want to belong to a group.
Right.
But any group, it doesn't matter how it's constituted, will have its pluses and minuses.
That's exactly right.
We have to, as you say, as thinking, intelligent, believing, will be.
It's always raising the questions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, insights. And I'm going to try this out on you. I may have said this before, but I try it out because it's something that occurred to me, but I want to see what kind of value it has. Insights by their very existence create blind spots.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. That's very powerful. Yeah. That actually rings very true. Yeah.
I mean, because it seemed to be one of the ways in which I illustrate this is my work with cameras. I love cameras. Now you have this thing called a depth of field. So, there are things that you can do where I can focus on the tip of your nose and your eyes are out of focus.
Yeah.
That's okay. Or I can focus on your eyes and the tip of your nose is out of focus. Or if I open it up or close it down, I think maybe it's closing it down, I can create a wider field, depth of field, so that the things in front of you, you may be the subject right here. You may be, the subject may be like right here. And I create space here and create space on the other side that allows everything within that realm to be in focus. Or I can focus on any one of those things and everything else is out of focus.
Right. And then what about what's not being captured by that frame? Even with
precisely.
That, open it up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, so then they have these things called fish eyes and wide angle lenses where you'll take pictures of landscapes, the case may be, so that that everything in front and behind.
Wider perspective, it's always going to be leaving something out.
There's always something that you are not seeing.
Right, and that's the beauty.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it is right. The beauty paradox, is right. It's the paradox and the beauty. If I'm looking, if I put a can of Coca-Cola in front of you, and you and I are looking at it from two different perspectives, what I see is going to be necessarily different from what it is that you see.
Right.
It doesn't make what I see the whole truth. It certainly doesn't make what you see the whole truth. But as I describe to you what I see, and you describe to me what you see, then the two of us have a better understanding of what we're both taking a look at. And so I've got to trust what it is that you see, and but I can verify. I can flip that can around. And I can say, "Oh no, it didn't. It wasn't this. It was a little bit that."
It just
so
requires the ability to converse, right? And
that's
to be
exactly
open.
right.
You know,
That's right.
when you put it as you put it initially, it's so profound. I mean, hit me immediately the truth of what you said. That insights by the, I'm paraphrasing, insights by their very nature are, how did you put it?
They create blind spots.
They create blind spots. So this immediately reminded me of a very brilliant, well-known sociologist. She's really a philosopher as well at Columbia by the name of Saskia Sassen. And she put, I heard in one of her lectures, she put essentially what you said in this type of language. She said that she's always interested vis-a-vis theories, right? Which they're insights, right? And making sense of the world. She's like, so she put it to paraphrase her, but essentially that theories will capture something, but she's always interested in the penumbra. So just as the streetlight illuminates certain things, she says that she's always looking at the edges of that illumination, what is being left out.
Right.
Right. So.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, and that's important to look for. It's important to look for, because what's not being illuminated may provide us with an insight that will help shape what it is that is illuminated. And because what is illuminated and what is, they don't exist in opposition to one another.
No, they don't. Yeah.
They in fact complement each other. So in a very real way, the marginalized have more to do with the center than perhaps the center or the marginalized actually know.
Oh wow.
You know, they have impact. It has impact. Like, for instance, you know, again, Toni Morrison has this book called Playing in the Dark. And she talks about how much hatred the dominant society has for Black people, and yet it can't wait to look like the Black people, like, even at the expense of going out to the sun and catching, you know, skin cancer. Can't want to dance like the dark people, want to sing like them, want to dress like them, want to dance like them, want to do the definition of the people who are marginalized is the definition of that which is cool. And everybody, we want to be cool. So it's kind of schizophrenic.
Deeply schizophrenic.
That you hate the thing that you love, or you love the thing that you hate. The thing that you despise is the thing that you keep being drawn to in ways that you can't actually explain.
And there's some deep psychological
work
that needs to be done, right? Whereby exactly it's, I mean, I had, you know, I was thinking some years ago about this vis-a-vis the West's relationship to Islam, right? Where, again, in sort of broad-based archetypal terms, that the West is always, you know, in some shape or form is demonizing, othering the Islamic world and Islam, etc., etc. And at the same time, historically, the West has tried to emulate the Islamic world, borrowed significantly from the Islamic world. And until this day, right, it's the history books do not do justice to the amount of borrowing that happened. In some cases, stealing.
Stealing. Good. Anytime you take it and you haven't, isn't that what they call it? When you take somebody's idea and write it down as your own, and that's called plagiarism?
Of course, right. And so with, not only has there not been, right, for the most part, for the majority of the part, has there not been an acknowledgement of this borrowing and dependency, historically and in contemporary times in different ways. But there's an outright, not just denial, but the demonization, right?
Yeah.
So somehow it's on some weird, I haven't been able to understand it fully, but it's almost like in a macro scale, on a macro level, the demon, shall we say, to identify this force, right, this tendency, the demon recognizes that he or she, it is dependent on this other that it sees as the other, but and therefore realizes that on some level the other is better than it, right? On some level, but because of that very dependency, it must then denigrate the other and say you are nothing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Just to feel good about. Okay, I've had that experience personally. Get this. This is not sure how much to divulge because this certain names might come up on the window. So without mentioning too many details, but you get a good sense. So I had written this. This is back in my PhD days at Columbia, some years ago now. I wrote this paper for a professor, very big name professor at Columbia, world famous. And he read it and he absolutely loved it. He said, this is beautiful, this is amazing, what are you going to do with it, right? This, that, and the other. So I was like, I don't know, this is kind of not really my major focus. I'm not sure if I will. So I don't know, I was thinking what to do with it. I had that guy briefly on my committee, on my dissertation committee, right? Because he's a big name. I thought if I can have him, it'll be good for me, right? And I actually respected him. It came to a point where I needed recommendation letters for certain scholarships, things like that. I wasn't hearing back from him. I wrote to him, dude, what's going on? Still don't hear back. In the meantime, it's a very interesting time. And I was very naive. I probably still am in some ways, but a little less so today than I was then. So around that same period, another graduate student had written to me that we have Professor such and such. There's a seminar that he's, it's a smaller seminar for graduate students and professors. He's presenting on a particular paper. Would you like to respond to it? I was like, sure, send it my way. It's my paper, but he's reworded it. And okay, now this is, get my naivety, right? I was like, oh my God, this must have been such and such's way of trying to get me involved without thinking, wait, this guy just stole my, this is the subservient mode of my thinking that's coming through now. My master is giving me some acknowledgement. Okay, I get back, I was like, person X, I write to him, you still haven't written back. He was like, Hassan, I would have expected by now that you would have gotten the message that I'm not basically interested in it. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, there must have been some confusion. Still confused, right? Stupid, naive me. He's like, no, there's no confusion. This is very clear. So the guy basically, this paper ends up becoming a chapter in one of his major books, very well received. He's a huge name, okay? So this was traumatic, to put it mildly, right?
I can imagine.
I shared this story with a friend some years later after the event, and she said something really cool. She said, Hassan, if person X is stealing your stuff now, don't worry, you don't have to worry about yourself. But I don't think which I really appreciated. I think it occurred to me later on, and I think I pieced this together for myself. Actually, no, in discussion with this friend, she helped me, right? She said, he knew full well what he was doing. And because of what he did, he had to denigrate you. He ended up being very denigratory.
Right.
And this is the mindset.
That's the mindset.
Based mindset that knows exactly
right. They know what they're doing.
The demonic mindset. It has stolen from you.
Right.
And it's stolen from black and brown bodies.
That's exactly
throughout
right.
history. And because it can't acknowledge its own evil, it has to
denigrate you. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, listen, the signature composition of the Gershwin brothers, George and Ira Gershwin, was Porgy and Bess. Folk opera, right? As if all operas aren't folk operas, but that's a whole other. Every time they talk about Porgy and Bess, it's denigrated as a folk opera. It's not quite an opera because it's not, but as far as I'm concerned, all operas have kind of folk tale stuff to it. But it primarily is because it's the story about Black people. So Gershwin went down south and lifted whole chord progressions that found their way into Porgy and Bess. Now they did some other stuff, some other great work, but their signature without Porgy and Bess, nobody paying any attention to the Gershwin brothers, but they stole that stuff, and that's kind of the way in which they've been operating. I mean, just you're right. They cannot acknowledge the depth of your gift, and can say even to
and maybe the lack of their creativity. It's said. And not to say that this person, I mean, he's very brilliant, don't get me wrong, but like he's stealing as well. Like, how brilliant are you really?
Right, if you're stealing. And how much other stuff is he stolen?
Right,
that's the other
I'm sure he has his own, but it makes me wonder, right? And this is one of the issues that I have with academia. It's full of major assholes. But,
right, major assholes.
Who in their writings, they present themselves as the defenders of the weak and so forth. But I've had it put regarding the sort of demonic forces in the world, that they hate the human sort of spirit, because the demonic lacks creativity. And we all have the demonic tendency. We have that possibility with it.
Yes.
But it hates creativity.
Right.
Right, because because it doesn't have it in itself.
It has nothing of its own. It steals everything that it's got. It's stolen just about everything that it's gotten. And you look around, you see it all over the place. I mean, this notion about Greek philosophy, that all this stuff happened, the richness of what we call Greek philosophy, all happened at a time when Greece was in the middle of economic, social, and political chaos. And so now we're supposed to believe that these great Greek philosophers who've created all this stuff. No, they stole that stuff. They lifted it. They went to the library in Alexandria and lifted whole texts and came back and published it in their own damn name. It's almost as if I had, if nobody else knew that there was a book called To Kill a Mockingbird, and I had been able to get a hold of a copy of it, and I took Lee Harper's name off of it and put my name on it. And everybody running around saying that DeForest wrote this great book called, To Kill a Mockingbird, when they didn't do it at all.
That's pure,
but it's
and it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
Why do you think that like it's happening as we speak?
As we speak, it's going on. Yeah. But you see, this is the thing, that when it's so naked that everybody can see it, it can no longer hide. And this is the thing about what we're seeing here. What we're seeing is a kind of revelation that people are beginning to see it. They're saying, oh, that's what this is. Yeah, this is what this has always been. You just haven't seen it up until now, or it hasn't affected you the way it's affected other people. So you can begin to see it in a way that was easy not to see before, because one of the things that the deceiver does, in addition to stealing everything, is it distracts people. That's one of the things about Donald Trump. He is the best thing that he is being as president is a distractor. He can distract everybody from the fact that we've got all these incompetent lawyers that are now in these federal positions, because while he's running around playing a clown, he and Mitch McConnell and the rest of the rest of the Republicans in the Senate are appointing all these judges to full-time positions, to lifetime positions, that many of them have been whatever the bar association is, that kind of looks at the quality of these lawyers and says, no, these folks don't have this. They're not qualified. But he's, the Senate doesn't care that these individuals are not qualified. All they care about is that they're doing the bidding of someone who's pulling Trump's string as well. So I'm not surprised about it. It's what's the word I'm looking? It's disconcerting. But on the other hand, you have to be glad that you see it. Glad that it is being revealed in a way that we hadn't revealed before. There's this book that goes back to what I was saying about Greek philosophy, what's called what I call a misnomer. There's a book called Stolen Legacy, where he talks about this fallacious notion of this great Greek tradition that everybody argues that Greece gave us, when they didn't get it from Greece at all. It probably came from the Hierophants out of Egypt.
Oh, wow. Wow. Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, please leave us with some prayers and some thoughts of upliftment and.
Yeah. Because I don't want us to be discouraged, Hassan. There are a lot of things
can't be
that
naive
are discouraging.
At the same time.
Yeah. Don't be naive, but I also don't want us to be discouraged, because I do think that what is that has been hidden for so long is in fact coming to light. And I think that that's what we're seeing. I mean, these horrible things that we're seeing, these are not things that did not exist. It's not like people I keep hearing the word unprecedented. Well, who are you talking to? Are you talking to the indigenous people? They got some stories to tell you.
Exactly.
Are you talking to the Africans? I mean, we've seen Donald Trump. We've been watching Donald Trump for the last 400 years. I mean, he didn't just show up, when he came down, he and his wife came down that escalator in July of 2015. No, we've known him. We've seen him 100 times before. So what's happening is that people who have been blind, in some cases a kind of willful blindness, are now being forced to see the thing that they have been trying to avoid seeing all along. There's this marvelous book. It's called the Racial Contract. Charles W. Mills, I think his middle name is W. Mills, and he talks about white supremacy in a way that really strips away the scale, so that you can see it in the way it's operationalized in the lives of this nation and so forth. So, I say, take heart. Don't be discouraged. It's easy to be discouraged. I was weeping in my service on Sunday morning when I was praying and thanking God that God revealed God's self to us in spite of these conditions, and maybe even because of these conditions. Now I see God more clearly operative in my life than I did when, these questions that we're asking, this interaction that you and I are having, it just in part as a result of this COVID thing, but so much more is going on. And I want us to be encouraged, because I think there's in Revelation somewhere it says, "Woe to you, O earth, for the devil has come down to you in great fury, because he knows that his time is short." And if that is the case, and I do believe it's the case, that his time is short, that what we have to do is to not be naive about the things that we're seeing, not give over to a sense of despair or hatred, because you need to keep, even in the midst of dealing with people and seeing scenarios that are inhuman, not to lose focus of their humanity.
Yes.
I have to keep focused that Donald Trump is not a monster.
Yes.
That what he is a human being that is behaving monstrously.
Yes.
But there's a fundamental difference between those two things. And I don't want to lose my humanity by denying him his humanity, because we are still human beings, flawed human beings, operating in a world that needs to recognize the humanity of all people, even when we're in the middle of even when they're in the middle of a war. I mean, there's this marvelous discussion about how in the midst of the First World War, Christmas came. and men in German foxholes and men in British foxhole were singing Christmas carols to each other and throwing one another's candy bars. They stopped fighting on Christmas Day. And they sang Christmas carols and they threw chocolate bars at each other. Well, the 26th, they went back to shooting one another and killing each other and cussing each other. But at least for that 24-hour period, in the midst of the inhumanity of that great war that shocked the conscience of nations all across the globe, that in the middle of that, there was enough of a spark of the humanity in all of them to put down their weapons and pick up Christmas carols and chocolate bars and heave them at each other, as opposed to weapons and hand grenades and other armaments of war. So that if in the midst of that, people can stumble upon humanity, sometimes it's in the midst of situations like that that humanity rears its marvelous head, and that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm trusting in. I think that these things are as bad as they are in part because there is a change coming, and that we must be a part of that change. And that's my prayer, that we must be a part of that change. We must continue to have these conversations. We must encourage others to have these conversations, particularly the people with which we disagree sometimes the most vehemently, but find a way to recognize ourselves in them.
Yes.
And maybe perhaps we can recognize them even in ourselves. I mean, can I see Donald Trump in me?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Am I prepared to look for it?
So
that's the question. That's the question. And that's not much of a prayer, but that's my prayer. That we will recognize, even in our enemies, even in our enemies, we will recognize their humanity. Because in their humanity is our humanity.
Wow. Amen.